Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in for our third Earth Month webinar. My name is Lily Mullock. I am the marketing coordinator for the New Jersey chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and I'm very excited you could join us today. We will be hearing from two presenters, Elliot Nagel and Rebecca Hilbert. They will be highlighting our land conservation efforts during today's presentation, 50 by 50, Shaping New Jersey's Final Landscape. Next slide, please. All right, so as always, before we begin, I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping items here. We do have live captions enabled for this webinar. To access them, navigate to your Zoom toolbar and click the button labeled CC Live Transcript. From there, you can turn the captions on or off. You could adjust the font size and color, and you can also choose to translate the captions to the language of your choice. Just to keep in mind, we do have time at the end of this webinar for a live Q&A session with the host. So of course, if you have any questions that come to mind during the webinar, feel free to pop them in the Q&A button there on your screen, and then you can ask questions during the live session as well. And then lastly, we will be recording this webinar. You will receive a link to this recording in a follow-up email that you can expect to get from us sometime next week. So with those items out of the way, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. Next slide. Thank you, Elliot. All right, so Elliot Nagel is our Director of Lands for the Nature Conservancy in New Jersey, where he oversees the organization's land conservation and stewardship program. Prior to joining TNC, Elliot worked with the New York Botanical Garden, U.S. Forest Service, and the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. He has over a decade of experience in the fields of ecology, forest management, and green infrastructure, including many years working in urban environments across New Jersey and in New York City. He holds a Master's of Forestry from Yale University and a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Planning and Design from Rutgers University. Also presenting today is our External Affairs Associate, Rebecca Hilbert. Rebecca joined the Nature Conservancy in 2023. As a member of the government relations team, she engages with elected officials at all levels of government and works to build relationships with various other partner groups, agencies, and stakeholders throughout New Jersey to promote our conservation priorities through environmental policy. Before joining the Nature Conservancy, Rebecca served as a senior policy manager for the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, working on their policy programs, government relation goals, coalition work, and their election programs. She holds a bachelor's degree in environmental studies from Stockton University. And now that we've gotten to know our presenters a little bit, I'm going to pass it along to Elliot to get started with today's webinar.
Hey everyone, thanks to Lily. Great to see everyone turning out for this conversation today. Really looking forward to some of the questions that you guys have, so feel free to hold those and ask them when there's a chance at the end of the presentation. I'm going to be giving a quick overview of some of the work that the Nature Conservancy does, what we do in New Jersey, and how the work we do in New Jersey contributes to the larger organization. And I'm really going to be setting the stage for Rebecca to talk more about some of the policy efforts that are happening across the state right now to accelerate the rate of conservation. So I'll be giving some overview information, some things that some of you might be aware of already, but I think it's important context when we're talking about land conservation. So to kick it off, the Nature Conservancy. So those of you that are familiar with the Nature Conservancy, you're probably aware of some of our origin story, our history, but it's always important to reiterate. So we were founded in the early 1950s with a very specific effort in mind. There was a focus on conserving and protecting a really critical site in New York. There's a Hemlock Gorge, a really unique space along the Mianus River Gorge. And that was really the birth of the land conservation focus of the Nature Conservancy. And that after, achieving that project, that land conservation has been at the core of the work that we've done since then, since the 50s. Now, as an organization, we've grown a lot, and I'll talk a bit about some of the other areas that we work, but land conservation is really at the heart of a lot of the work that we continue to do. So the mission of the Nature Conservancy today is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. And I think there's an important component of that to highlight, which is all life, right? So we often think about nature, we talk about plants and wildlife, but we understand that protecting those habitats, protecting those species is important not only for them, but also for us to live healthy lives as humans on this earth that share this earth. And so that's actually critical when you look at our goals and the work that we do at the organization. All of that work is reflected in the duality of that, nature and people. Our vision, which I think is important, and I'll have to read it because it's a little bit longer, but we envision a world where the diversity of life thrives and people act to conserve nature for its own sake and its ability to fulfill our needs and enrich our lives. So again, that's getting at that duality of the importance for nature to thrive and be healthy on its own, and the importance for us to be able to survive on this planet. And so that guides a lot of our work. As I said, we started in New York, but we've grown tremendously. So we are now in 80 plus countries and territories. You can see that represented on this map around the world, throughout most of the Americas. We have over 400 staff and scientists that are guiding our work as an organization. And through our work, we've been able to protect 125 million acres of land and 280 million acres of oceans. So we've done a lot of work since our first protection project in the 1950s. And as I mentioned, we do a lot more than just conservation, than land conservation today. So I'll go through, these are the goals that the organization has set at a global level. So much of the work that we do in the state contributes to these goals that are set globally. And I'll be speaking specifically about land today, but I just wanted to highlight this so that you're aware of all the other work that's happening across the organization. So we have a goal to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere by 3 billion metric tons, to conserve 1.6 billion acres of land, to conserve 9.9 billion acres of ocean, to conserve more than 620,000 miles of rivers and streams, to promote the leadership of 45 million people from indigenous communities as they steward their vast global lands and waters, and to use nature to help 100 million people at severe risk of climate-related emergencies. And so, as I mentioned, the work that we're talking about today contributes to the land conservation goal. So when we think about land conservation at a global scale, right, because we're a global organization, we have the unique opportunity to think beyond typical boundaries, right? So we don't have to think just at a state level or just at a regional level or just at a nation level. We have the ability to think at whatever level is appropriate for the natural resource that we're working to protect. And you can see this reflected across the world. So we have global priority landscapes across the world, largely in the tropics, right? But we also, in North America, the key global focal place for the organization is the Appalachian Mountains. So I'm going to be talking a lot about the Appalachian Mountains and their importance. And yep, just highlighted right there, Eastern North America. So this is a map. So we zoomed in, right? So we took this map and then we just zoom way in. It's the same boundaries. And this gives you an overview of the Appalachian region of North America. It's 198 million acres, spanning 2,000 miles from Alabama through Nova Scotia, with nearly 400,000 miles of streams and rivers. The Appalachians have long been known to be a hotbed of biodiversity, right? So we've known for a long time that there is incredible biodiversity in the Appalachians, many unique and rare habitats and species associated with those habitats that are found nowhere else in the world. The Appalachians, have over 80,000 occurrences of rare species. They store 9 billion tons of carbon in the forest itself. So it's an incredible landscape for that reason alone, right? Just because of its ability to harbor this incredible natural biodiversity that it has. In addition to that, and as I was talking before about the duality of having nature and people, right? We can't, both are intrinsically combined together. In this map, I think it's a really good map because it shows the urban areas. The Appalachians also cross through the most densely populated region of the US. It is an area that many people interact with, either live within or visit often. But it's also a region that many people don't realize. that all of these communities are reliant on for its natural resources. So the Appalachians provide clean drinking water to over 36 million people and produce 1.8 billion tons of oxygen that we use to breathe clean air every day. So the Appalachians is really a critical landscape for nature and for people. The other thing that's important to notice, or to note on this map, and is the reason why the Appalachians are so important and identified as a global focal place, is what's in green on this map. This map highlights what's called resilient and connected lands, and so that's in the green. These are lands that have been identified by scientists to show that they are both resilient to changes in climate. So they're already important for biodiversity, right? We've already identified that. They're resilient to changes in climate. So as we see changes in climate, these areas will be able to adapt. And they're connected, which means that they allow connections and opportunities for species to migrate across the region to complete their life cycles, and to adapt themselves as we see changes in climate. So it's really a critical landscape for that reason. And I'll talk more about resilient and connected lands. You might see the acronym RCN, which is Resilient and Connected Network. But I wanted to highlight before we get into that, most people in New Jersey, in New York, in Pennsylvania might not be familiar with the term Appalachians, right? The Appalachians we often think of are, down in North Carolina or West Virginia, but all of the mountain ranges that are around us, at least many of them, we know by other local names, but are still within the Appalachians. So it's important to highlight that just so people can put into sense of context of where they are and where the Appalachians are. So as if you've heard of the Catskills or the Kittatinny Ridge or the Kittatinny Mountains, the Highlands, the Poconos, Bear Mountain, High Point, all of those areas fall within the Appalachians, but it just have a local context or name to them. And so, as I was talking about the Appalachians that provide an opportunity for migration for species, this is a really cool graphic that shows those migration patterns across North America. Blue is for birds, mammals are in this pink reddish color, and then you have amphibians in yellow. And this is a very general description of migration patterns, but what it's showing is that in the face of changes in climate, we're anticipating species migrations in very unique patterns across North America. And what stands out to you immediately in this is the Eastern North America. And I think if you can see my mouse, Eastern North America right here is almost a super highway for all of these species. And that's the Appalachians. And the reason why that it's a super highway is not, it's partly because of the habitat that's there, right? I mentioned that it's already has a unique habitat rich in biodiversity, but also it's kind of its geographic features. So the Appalachians run from south to north, and they have changes in elevation. Both of those aspects allow species to migrate as we see changes in climate and temperatures. Species can move upward in elevation. They can also move northward in latitude as they need to. And so that connectivity is what really creates this landscape as something unique. So what are we doing in New Jersey? So that is the organization. And as I was mentioning, the work we do in New Jersey contributes to these larger organizational or global goals. And I'll just mention these are some really cool photos. These are photos of bobcats, or at least this photo is a photo of a bobcat that was right at our Johnsonburg Swamp Preserve. So if you've been there, this is right close to the summit right there in Johnsonburg Swamp. So as we keep moving, so in New Jersey, just a quick overview. New Jersey was, our chapter was established soon after the founding of the organization. We have roughly 50 employees. We're based in Chester, New Jersey, in Morris County, and we have an office in Southern New Jersey. And then we have protected over 60,000 acres of land in the state since our founding. So land conservation has been at the heart of what we've been doing in New Jersey for a long time. And I'll talk a bit more about some of those lands. But this slide here is just to reiterate that connection, right? So we have a global goal of conserving 1.6 billion acres. And what we're doing in New Jersey is conserving 60,000 with a high priority focus on 10,000 acres in Bobcat Alley, which contribute to that 1.6 billion. And I'll talk about Bobcat Alley in a second. So again, when we look at that migrations in motion map, right, we're looking at where species are migrating. It's a still of that map. It's a good indication of where our work is focused right now. How are we in New Jersey contributing to protecting this important Appalachian corridor? Well, we're focusing that work in the Appalachian region of New Jersey, which is Warren and Sussex counties, an area that we call Bobcat Alley, and I'll talk about that in a second. As you can see in this map, that is where you see the connection up into the Appalachians. But that's not to say, and I'll reiterate this again later, that there aren't important landscapes that need to be protected and conserved for biodiversity across the entire state of New Jersey. What this is focused on, and what our work in Bobcat Alley is focused on, is how do we, as TNC, as a global organization, pool our resources to contribute to something larger. And one of those things is contributing to protecting the entire Appalachians. So we work with our partners in every state on this initiative. So Bobcat Alley. So this is the Appalachian region, that region you just saw in New Jersey, the northwestern part of the state, Warren and Sussex counties. And then zoom in, right? And it's this, the boundary that you see is really the Appalachian boundary as it passes through northwestern New Jersey. Off to the, and see if you can see my mouse, off to the left here, this is the Kittatinny Ridge. So this is the Kittatinny Ridge as it runs down into Pennsylvania, all the way down into West Virginia. And on this inset map, you can actually see it all the way down here into West Virginia. Then this area is the Highlands, and the Highlands, the New Jersey Highlands, run into the New York Highlands, which pass all the way up through New York into Massachusetts. And you can see kind of that connection here in this inset map. New Jersey plays a critical role in maintaining a connection between these two large landscapes as they pass from the central Appalachians up through into the northern Appalachians. And you can see as we get into New Jersey, we have a very small geography where this landscape is connected, and it even leads into a bottleneck, right? This bottleneck right here. And so we've identified in this map, you can see these orange boundaries. These orange boundaries indicate where in this geography we have very critical lands that are necessary for connectivity of species across the landscape, across the entire Appalachian region, really, and where there's a threat to those lands. So in yellow, what you're looking at are lands that aren't protected, lands that could be lost to development and connections destroyed. And so what we're focusing on here in these focal areas, which is what we call Bobcat Alley, is prioritizing our conservation in those areas to make sure that those connections aren't lost. That's where you get these 10,000 acres, and that's where our 10,000 acre goal is focused, is in this geography. This is important, these connections, and I'll just reiterate this one more time. This is important not only for the plants and the plants and landscapes that are there, but also for the wildlife that rely on them. Bobcat are a critical species that were once endangered in the state, and we've been working with partners in the state agencies to help restore populations, and critical protection efforts like this play a large hand in doing that. They need a large landscape in order to roam and to have a healthy life cycle. And so by ensuring these connections, we're ensuring that those species can survive into the future. But bobcat is just one species, right? That's just an example of one species that utilizes this landscape. By restoring this landscape for bobcats and protecting it for bobcats, we are focused on protecting it for a large diversity of wildlife and plants that rely on it. So looking at this a bit further, so how do we do this work? And if you look at this graphic, really just focus on the graphic, it's one piece at a time. It really is a puzzle, right? So you're looking at just protecting the next piece, protecting the next piece, protecting the next piece. And this is just showing some of the protection that's happened over the last decade or so. But you can see we're working on building it one piece at a time. We work with willing landowners, we help educate, we help communicate. We really work with people that understand the value of their own land, understand the conservation importance of this geography, and want to do something about it. And we come in as an entity, as an organization that is able to say, let us help you protect this permanently so that in future generations we know it isn't lost. And we do that not just ourselves, although we do a lot of this work ourselves. We also do this in tandem with partners. We've helped develop a coalition for the Appalachian region where we pull together state agencies in both open space and agriculture, county agencies, local land trust partners, you name it, anyone that's working in this geography focused on conservation. We meet and we discuss how do we do this work and how do we achieve this work together. And so this is just an example of how that work's happening. We're roughly a third or a little bit more way through our 10,000 acre goal, but there's a lot more to do in order for us to achieve this goal by 2030. So I just wanted to highlight, so this is the Appalachian region again, right? But there's a different layer on this map than we saw before, and it's those red lines. I'll go back. It looks great, right? When you start to pull together all these puzzle pieces, you're like, wow, we're building great connections, and we are, right? We're protecting these properties, building great connections. There's one caveat to that, right? And that's you can protect the land all you want, but if you don't think about how species are crossing our major barriers, one of those being roadways, then we aren't seeing the full potential of those protected lands, right? So this is just an image on the right I just pulled out of Bobcat Alley. It's Route 80. You can imagine, let's say the property up here is a protected farmland, protected open space down here. Great work has been done to protect those lands, but we need crossings for wildlife, not only for wildlife, but also for safe travel for people, right? We all know too well the impacts of vehicle collisions. So we've been working with partners across the entire Northeast in each state. So there's a group at the Nature Conservancy that's been working in each state with Department of Environmental Protection and Department of Transportation colleagues to say, how do we start to rethink how we develop our roadways to better accommodate wildlife and be safer environments for people at the same time? We have actually developed a training that's being implemented in New Jersey for engineers in New Jersey, specifically with the state DOT. And so there's a lot of work happening right now to rethink how do we allow for crossings to be implemented in these spaces. This is just a graphic that goes to show this a little bit more, right? So you have species that are working to try to get across this landscape. Say they need to get from here all the way over to the other side. There's all these barriers. They can't pass a road. If they get on a road, they get stuck by a barrier. Aquatic species, right? So I'm talking a lot about land, but these barriers to connectivity are true for aquatic species as well. We have an incredible amount of dams across our state and across our region as a result of our industrial past that aren't used anymore, that have no purpose, and they simply serve as barriers for species to be able to migrate. So thinking about how do we adapt and how do we create spaces that better accommodate connectivity is critical for this work as well. And this is just another graphic showing that you can provide opportunities for species to go under roadways, you can remove dams, you can do overland bridges, many different things to allow species to migrate across a region. This is an example. So this image right here is just is over Route 78. It's in the Watchungs. It's an example of an overland crossing specifically for wildlife that allow wildlife to cross without having to go down into the roadway. And then these graphics on the right just show closer up examples of under road crossings. There are many simple structures that can be built into our existing infrastructure that allow for animals to cross. So we actually, and Rebecca was a large part of this, and I'll let her talk about it if there's other things she wants to add. We were worked with our partners and we worked with legislators to help get a bill passed last year that actually is requiring the state DOT, Department of Transportation, and DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, to work together to develop a plan to implement wildlife crossings in the most critical pieces and most important areas of our state. So we've done a lot of work in land protection, but if we can't connect those, then we'll never see the full potential of those areas. So that was a huge bill that got passed. They're working on those plans right now. I believe they have a couple of years to complete that planning and implementation process. So that was a huge win for some of this work across the state. And then as we're talking about statewide work, I just wanted to highlight, so this map on the right shows where we have worked to protect land since since our founding, really. And we've protected land in the northwestern part of the state, as I've mentioned, Bobcat Alley, Highlands, Ridge and Valley, Kittatinny Ridge, and really statewide, but three areas, the really northwest, the Pinelands, as well as the Delaware Bay Shore down here is where we've helped protect a lot of land. Most of these lands, and so I talk about protecting land, conserving land, we work to identify who is the best steward of that land long term. We do own and hold a lot of land ourselves that we manage as public preserves, and we promote accessibility and education and restoration on those preserves. But many of the lands that we've protected over time have gone on to become county park systems, state parks, federal parks, local parks, parks under the stewardship of other land trusts. So we really work with any partner we can. and identify who is the best steward of those lands long term. And something else I just wanted to highlight and then tee it up for Rebecca is that we have been working on an effort for many years now called New Jersey Conservation Blueprint. So as I mentioned, we're doing a lot of on-the-ground land protection in the Appalachians region, helping contribute to this larger regional effort that TNC is working on across the Eastern North America. But that's not to say that there aren't also important landscapes that need to be protected and identified statewide. So we've been working with the New Jersey Conservation Foundation and Rowan University's GeoLab to develop a tool called the New Jersey Conservation Blueprint, where we actually have worked with scientists and experts and academic experts to identify where are the most critical remaining lands to be protected in the state. And we've done this both for ecological reasons, and so you can see the ecological integrity model on the left, as well as for agricultural priorities, and you can see the agricultural model on the right, as well as many others which are on the website there. But this work has then spurred the development of really a New Jersey Conservation Blueprint coalition of partners who meet regularly to talk about how are we working to achieve these goals statewide to protect the most critical remaining lands left. And so this tool has been used, as I mentioned, not only to spur the development of that coalition, which led to a lot of the work that Rebecca's going to talk about in a second, but also has been used by municipalities, private property owners, local land trusts, the state, Green Acres Program, and SADC to prioritize where to protect land. So this is how a lot of our work is touching down statewide, not just within the Appalachian geography. So that's a quick overview. I'm sure I skipped something, but if there's any questions, let me know. I'll pass it on to Rebecca.
Great. Thank you, Elliot. Hi everyone. My name is Rebecca Hilbert, and I'm the External Affairs Associate here at TNC New Jersey. Our government relations and policy team here is a team of two, myself and our GR director, Phil. And it's our job, as Lily mentioned at the beginning, to use legislation, regulatory reforms, and partnerships to support all of the amazing on-the-ground work that all of our conservation teams are doing, from coast to rivers to cities and, of course, land. And so it is the lands part of our policy portfolio that I'm really excited to talk with you all about today. So Elliot, you can go to the next slide. So Elliot did a really great job explaining both our larger regional goals and the targeted focus of Bobcat Alley. So I'm going to tell you about how we're using policy to scale that conservation work to encompass the rest of the state. And one of the ways that we think we can get there is with a new conservation vision for New Jersey, 50 by 50, protecting 50% of our best remaining lands, about 500,000 more acres, by 2050. We'll talk about how we got to that goal, what those numbers really mean, what we're really trying to protect, and what the campaign looks like, and how you can help. Next slide. So, before we dive into that, I always do like to take a step back and ask, why do we care so much about conservation here in New Jersey? Why are we spending so much time and resources working towards this? And I'm sure everyone here today can provide their own answers about what open space, farmland, and parks mean to you and your communities. New Jersey is the Garden State, and yet so many people around the country, and even here at home, don't fully understand the extent that nature and land shapes the character of New Jersey. We're not just Route 1 and super fun sites and strip malls. We're the Pinelands down in South Jersey, we're the Highlands in the north, we're Liberty State Park and the Sourlands, we're our beaches and produce picking with our families, urban farming in Newark and hiking in Morton State Forest. Our natural areas play such a large role in what makes New Jersey livable and unique, all while being the most densely populated state in the country. And I think that's a really amazing thing to just recognize from time to time. Next slide. Okay, and while all of that is really important, I do also think it's important to highlight some of the more tangible benefits that conserving land provides to New Jersey, many that often get overlooked until it's too late and that we're not giving enough credit to. So, for example, you can take a look at this graphic here about all the benefits that nature gives us, but keeping New Jersey resilient from extreme weather, for example. Hurricanes, flooding, heat waves, and drought have cost taxpayers here more than $7.9 billion. Meanwhile, we know that forest fields and floodplains will absorb excess water during heavy rainfalls and storms. Trees and vegetation slow winds and anchor our soil, and these services buffer our communities from damage to things like roads, bridges, buildings, and sewer lines, reducing some pretty costly repairs. Trees and greening keep our communities cool, as summers are getting hotter and hotter. Let's take a look at agriculture. Agriculture is New Jersey's third largest industry. We have nearly 10,000 farms bringing in roughly $1.5 billion in revenue annually, keeping us, the garden state. And it serves as a major source of fresh produce for the whole Northeast region. Elliot already talked about how important conservation is for wildlife and our connectivity work. And then as for humans, outdoor recreation is a huge part of keeping us physically and mentally healthy. Not to mention that, outdoor recreation spending brings in about $18.9 billion annually and creates over 143,000 jobs. Clean water. Water from the highlands region supports 70% of state residents, including many in urban areas who might not even realize that. Conserved forests provide free filtration. And I didn't know this until recently, but for every 10% increase in forest cover, water treatment and chemical costs decrease by 20%. And that means for a lot of New Jersey industries and businesses that depend on clean water, forest filtered water, the state stands to lose billions of dollars in economic investment if we lose that service. It's important for us to make clear exactly what we're investing in when we invest in conservation. Next slide. So not that we don't really needed it, but now that we're reminded of what we're really fighting for and what we stand to lose, let's take a brief look, a state of the state, if you will, for land protection here. When it comes to conservation, what shape are we in today? There's a lot to be proud of in New Jersey on this topic. Our residents have been historically very supportive of conservation, voting yes on every ballot measure. Some of you might actually remember casting a particularly critical vote when the conservation community successfully championed a constitutional amendment in 2014 to create a stable source of funding for New Jersey's state green acres, blue acres, farmland preservation, and historic preservation programs. And then just really quick, in case you're not aware of this history, well, I'm referring to what we call the CBT funding for conservation. Because of that ballot measure, New Jersey dedicates roughly 6% of its corporate business tax revenue to fund open space, farmland, and historic preservation. This provides a stable source of conservation governed by the Preserve New Jersey Act. So that way we don't have to vote every year, for example, to fund these critical programs, and we can start planning long term. So because we have this reliable funding, we have the support, New Jersey is one of the first states to officially reach the goal of preserving 30% of our land by 2030, a goal that many other states and other parts of the world outside of the US actually are still working on. Again, with how many people live here, that's an incredible victory. Not only that, but as of 2023, New Jersey reached a historic milestone of preserving 250,000 acres of farmland. That's some really great stuff and some stuff to be proud of as a state. Next slide. Okay, so while there is a lot to celebrate, that doesn't mean that we can rest on our laurels. And I think I'm missing a picture here. But currently New Jersey is at 1/3 developed, 1/3 preserved, and the final remaining third is up for grabs. As the first state to reach build out or set to reach build out by 2050, that means, by the way, all developable land has been developed. We have the opportunity to really shape what might be the race to the finish when it comes to New Jersey's landscape. So the picture that's missing, oh no, there it is. Okay, it popped up for me. Basically, this graph shows how conservation rates have been dropping in the span of number of transactions. So trends in development in New Jersey are leaning towards redevelopment, reducing land consumption, but though redevelopment plays a more significant role, land consumption for new development has not stopped. So next slide. Yeah, and this gets a little bit deeper into what that looks like. According to Rowan University, since the 1940s, development and urbanization have led to the loss of well over 1 million acres of wetlands, forest, and farmlands. And Jersey's only about 5 million acres. So now using maps that our partners at New Jersey Conservation Foundation have been able to put together, it helps us put this into perspective a bit. Since 1986, we've lost about 215,000 acres of farmland, which is about the size of Gloucester County, and 125,000 acres of forest, which is about all of Hudson and Essex County together in size. And then when you look at more recent data between 2015 and 2020, about 5 years, the equivalent of 3 football fields of farmland and 4 football fields of forest was lost per day. That's pretty significant. Nothing to joke about. Next slide. And then we've got some new threats, we've got some old threats. Some folks really started waking up to this during COVID and the warehouse boom, if you guys might remember. I think oftentimes a lot of people look at open space and farmland in their neighborhoods and take for granted that it's conserved just because it's there. And it isn't until that for sale sign goes up that you realize how easily it can be lost. And now we have the new threat of data centers, which, depending on the size and scale, will require a lot of land and water resources, not to mention the energy. Next slide. So that might have seen a lot of that was kind of a little doom and gloom. So I do want to start talking about the solution. In 2024, our partner that we mentioned, New Jersey Conservation Foundation, launched a report called Nature for All by Michelle Byers. A part of this report was outlining the need for a goal of preserving 50% of New Jersey's best remaining lands by 2050, which we're estimating comes out to be about those 500,000 acres. This goal spread really quickly throughout the conservation community and was soon adopted as something we should all be working towards together, as kind of the next big stage of what conservation means in New Jersey. Now, Elliot already told you about the Conservation Blueprint tool, and as a part of that community, New Jersey Conservation Foundation and the Nature Conservancy launched the first ever policy committee. We sat down with a number of state agency members, land trusts, county and local government reps, and we really asked ourselves, what would it take to make 50 by 50 a reality? What's slowing down the rates of conservation, and which of those problems can we use policy changes to help fix? Some highlights, some of these are obvious, maybe some aren't. Conservation is less lucrative than development. Conservation transactions take longer than development. There aren't enough landowner incentives for conservation. Land is more expensive than ever. And a lot of the traditional conservation foundations and funders no longer exist in the space. Not to mention that land trusts and local governments don't always have the staff and resources they need to aggressively pursue these transactions. These issues are a part of the list we came up with, and we spent time drafting a series of very specific recommendations that help us start to tackle them. No, not yet. Okay. So another big theme that came out of those workshops is the need for an official statewide goal. New Jersey hasn't had one since 1998, when former New Jersey Governor Christine Todd Whitman set a state goal of adding 1 million acres of open space to, at the time, the 854,000 acres that we had already preserved. We really believe we need top-down leadership like that to preserve 500,000 more in order to fulfill New Jersey's voter directive, the constant support that we've heard from voters that they like these initiatives and they want them to happen, and then to set New Jersey as a conservation leader and model for other states as they also start to reach build out. So next slide. Okay, so I do want to be clear because we get this question a lot, and it's a good question. What lands are we talking about? What do we mean when we say 500,000 more acres of our best remaining lands? We're not just throwing a dart at the map when it comes to the lands we want to preserve under this goal and saying that it counts. We mean 50% of the lands that are best for farmland and food production, open space and the ecological and economic services that we just discussed that they provide, and of course, lands best for community green space and equitable access to nature. The community feels that by preserving 500,000 more acres with these values in mind, we can protect the lands that keep New Jerseyans healthy and thriving while balancing other public needs, including affordable housing, transportation infrastructure, and economic and commerce needs. With proper planning and coordination, I think we can have it all. If you take a look at this chart and map, you'll see that these lands exist all throughout New Jersey, as Elliot was saying, meaning everyone in all regions stand to benefit from the 50 by 50 campaign, whether it comes from conserving that land directly in your own neighborhood or by receiving the benefits of conservation that come from preserved lands elsewhere that you, again, might not even know you get until they're gone. Next slide. Okay, so now that we know what 50 by 50 is, you might be asking what are the actual strategies to getting it done and who has a role to play. In reality, the campaign has three pillars, I'm calling them at the moment. One is our executive ask. We want Governor Sherrill to pass an executive order to set that official state acreage goal that I mentioned earlier. We know that leadership from the governor level is critical to establishing better coordination, better accountability, and stronger messaging that open space is critical infrastructure. And then we have our legislative asks, the second pillar, and another big one that's going to take a lot of work. A part of our 50 by 50 campaign is a package of 6 bills that work to set a legislative acreage goal. Bills that make CBT money go further for land trusts and local governments, bills that provide tax incentives to sell your land for conservation instead of development, and bills that get rid of some unnecessary fees when you decide to conserve your land. Now, some of these bills on their own may actually seem pretty small, but when you take them all together, we're talking about a pretty big impact on the conservation system. Unfortunately, there really is no one silver bullet solution that will legislate us out of our problems. So it's going to take multiple actions and steps and strategies to get us to where we need to be. But the good news is that the majority of our asks under 50 by 50 won't cost the state any additional money other than what's already allocated from the CBT. And we think that's a really great point to make in a budget cycle that it's so stressed. Our bill package is a good example of that. And so is our ask to make conservation procedures faster and more efficient. We're not asking for new money. We're asking that we sit down and take a look at what in the system is working, what's unnecessary, what's duplicative, and is slowing things down. How can we get the money out the door faster to compete with development timelines and increase the number of conservation transactions that are happening on the ground? So next slide. Okay. Very quickly, I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, so I do just want to make sure we're coming out of today with a clear understanding of what we want out of 50 by 50 and what we have the opportunity to do. So we have the opportunity to really cement our conservation legacy, preserve hundreds of thousands of more acres of recreational farmland and natural land. We have the opportunity to fulfill our voter directive using existing funding in a coordinated and efficient way. We have the opportunity to protect our clean drinking water, to strengthen our local food and outdoor recreation economies. We have the opportunity to build resilience to protect both people and property against flooding and other extreme weather events. And then, of course, like I said, to solidify who we are as the Garden State and New Jerseyans and what we care about. So next slide. Okay, what's next? So I'm hoping you might be asking yourselves by now, what is next and how can I help? Our policy team and our partners are doing our best to move this campaign forward. But in reality, your legislators, your local elected officials, and your governor really want to hear from you, their constituents. The bills in our package are being drafted as we speak. And eventually, we're going to need to move them through the process. We're going to need co-sponsors. We're going to need action. We're going to need your help to do that. We've just launched our 50 by 50 website, and soon we'll be updating it with ways that people can get involved, whether it's emailing your legislator, asking them to vote yes on one of our bills, or using one of our upcoming social media toolkits on 50 by 50 to spread the word online that this is something New Jersey should care about. There's a lot to care about nowadays, and there's no disputing that at all, but this deserves our voice as well. TNC members taking actions like the ones I just outlined were actually a really big reason about why our wildlife corridor bill was such a huge success and why it was actually passed. And I don't really see bills passed like this with unanimous bipartisan support. And I really do want to take a minute to thank everyone who helped us get that bill over the finish line, who took an action. Your voices really mattered, and we really appreciate it. We're heading into summer. We're going to be outside more. We're using our parks. We're enjoying our open spaces. We're stopping at produce stands if you're like me. And we're going to have the opportunity to really reflect and get loud about what we're enjoying. Why not write a quick message to your assembly member, your senator, your mayor, your council about how much you enjoy having access to these spaces and what they mean to you? Write a message to your local DPW, thanking them for maintaining these spaces because stewardship is a lot of work. Attend your local planning board meetings. I know a lot of us learned to do that during the warehouse boom, and make sure your town is looking hard at their master plans to ensure that the open space in your area actually is protected from large industrial, use. Because remember, as a member of a former planning board myself, if something is zoned for industry or development, it's really hard to legally say no, no matter how much we might want to. We're going to be drafting local ordinances to show that towns support a 50 by 50 state goal. So you can share that with your environmental commissions, your local reps. And there's obviously there's really no end to how you can support. And like I said, as we're making additions to our website, keeping it updated, we'll make sure that we keep you in the loop with specific actions that you can take. So I believe that is the end of my portion of the day, and I think we covered a lot, so hopefully not too much, and I'll pass it back to Lily.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elliot and Rebecca. That was a great presentation. So with the time that we have left, we are going to open the floor for some questions. I see we already have some in the Q&A box here, but please, if any come to mind, feel free to put your questions in that feature and we will answer what we can during the live session. If we don't get to it during the live session, we'll do our best to address your questions in the follow-up email that you can expect early next week. So let's get started here. Okay, so how do you determine what makes a piece of land part of the best remaining lands?
Awesome. Yeah, Rebecca, you want me to
Yeah,
jump
go
into
ahead.
it? Um, yeah, that's a good question. I just found the Q&A and I saw that first one too. Really, that is the heart of what the blueprint. So I imagine that's talking about when I was talking about the blueprint. That is the heart of what the blueprint is talking about. Now you have to take so you have to look at different criteria, right? It's hard to do all of that at the same time. The way we do it through Blueprint, which is what led a lot of the science behind what drove the development of this goal, is looking at different priorities. And so that might be the ecological integrity model is one example. And if you go into that tool, you can look and see what all of the subcomponents are of that tool. So you're looking at rare species habitat, you're looking at forests and wetlands, you're looking at um, soil characteristics, many different things that are comprising what makes an important piece of land to protect for its ecological integrity. Now, that might be very different when you're looking at an agricultural piece of land, right? So that model was built very differently, looking at ag resources and priorities. And then we have a water quality tool. It's looking at water quality, community green space, right? So if you're talking about access for people in parks, that's a completely different topic, right? So it really it depends on what you're looking at, but that's how we typically have done it in the past. Is we'll look at very specific areas. The other thing to mention with that, at least with the development of the blueprint, is that's not like me or Rebecca sitting down and saying, I think this one's the best for its ecological integrity. It included technical advisory committees of people who this is what they do. Like it might be biologists or scientists, academics, practitioners that are working on the ground who sat down and hashed out what the most important criteria is to include in developing a model for that tool. So anyway, that's probably more than you bargained for in terms of the tool development, but that's if you go onto the conservation blueprint, click on those modules, you'll see the components of those tools in there.
Awesome. Thank you, Elliot. And then, you know what, while we're on the topic of the blueprint, would you just mind explaining for our audience who this is intended to be used by, who this tool could be beneficial for, just in case there's any folks on the call who could, benefit from using the conservation blueprint?
So it's I feel like this would be an answer. So John Hassey, Dr. John Hassey, who works with Rowan University, he'll often say, and he's part of the team with Blueprint, that the blueprint is for everyone, right? Like the blueprint, and it's similar to what Rebecca was just saying about taking a hand in the planning, right? The blueprint in your local municipality. The blueprint is for literally anyone. If you're interested in you want to protect your land, right? And you want to understand what the different values are there, you can use the blueprint. If you want to know, how a piece of property that should be protected, and you're seeing it's zoned something differently, and you want to know why, it's important ecologically, you can go in there, or why it's important for farmland, you can go into the blueprint and find out. It is very much used as a tool by practitioners. So it's used heavily by local land trusts who are looking at prioritizing where to protect land. It is used by the state Green Acres and SADC programs when they're looking at land prioritization and helping the public that they work with understand where to protect land. They use the blueprint, and it's often used by municipalities as well. It's a very accessible mapping tool that doesn't require you to have like GIS background and experience to use. And there are many municipalities out there that don't have the capacity to hire on a staff person that's like full-time GIS expert. So being able to use the blueprint allows them to go in and say like these are the priorities without having to invest resources to do it themselves. So we really provided it as a tool for everyone to really invest in the planning and land use within their state.
Hmm. And Elliot, if I could just add to that,
Yeah.
I just as another way to really prove it is for everyone, I'm not particularly good at mapping tools, but I often will use the blueprint when I'm in a legislative meeting with a senator or an assembly member, and I'll pull up their district and I'll show them exactly how much land is left, quote unquote, up for grabs in their district. And some of them don't even realize it. They assume that those lands had been conserved, but when we show them no, like there's actually no protection there, they're very surprised, and it's a really useful tool for, displaying that to them.
Thank you, Rebecca and Elliot. Rebecca, I think this is a question for you. What are the next steps now that the Wildlife Corridor Action Plan bill was passed? How do we ensure its provisions are implemented and don't fizzle away?
That is a really great question, and something we're always struggling with in policy. Like, it's one thing to pass a bill, it's another thing to get it implemented. So right now, the DOT and DEP have a couple of years to draft the plan. And the good news is that in the bill, they're allowed to consult outside sources to help them do that. So TNC and a number of our partners plan on providing some expertise and advice to help shape that bill. And then I think they also have to present it to the legislature when they're done. That might come with a public comment period. I'm not sure, so I don't want to promise that. It depends on which process they use. But a next step after that, I think that we're envisioning is finding a way to fund these projects, and finding a way to make sure that we're doing it in an affordable way, in an efficient way, and something that just becomes an everyday practice.
Okay, great. And then while we're on the same topic, so is the Wildlife Corridor bill only focused on Bobcat Alley, or is it widespread across New Jersey? How do we know where the problems with wildlife mortality, sorry, how do we know where there are problems with wildlife mortality in the state?
Yeah, so it is focused all throughout the state, which we're really excited about. But Elliot, I think you might be in a better position to talk about the change program, not the change program.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'll jump in. Yeah, just so I hate to be throwing all these different mapping tools. This is another one, right? So there's one called Change. It's a cool acronym, but it's Connecting Habitats Across New Jersey. So CHANJ, if you look that up. So the state Fish and Wildlife Endangered and Non-Game Species Program has really done an incredible effort and more work than many other agencies have done across the Northeast at mapping connectivity of lands across the entire state. So, right, I talked a lot about connectivity, its importance across a large geography, the North America. But when you zoom into New Jersey, Change, the state Fish and Wildlife developed this tool called Change. And so in that, they're looking at where are their lands protected and where are there opportunities for species to migrate between them. And then they overlay roadways and they say, where are there critical barriers from species being able to move between significant protected lands? And so that's how they prioritize. And that's largely, I imagine, how they're going to prioritize when they're looking at the Wildlife Corridor Bill, is looking at where are there protected habitats, where are there critical connections, and where are those barriers. And all of that information is available through their Change tool, which is another mapping tool online. And they even have identified like critical barriers as a layer in that map.
Awesome. Thank you for the thorough explanation. Let's see here. What do I do if I have a suggestion for land to protect?
Yeah, I was hoping you'd ask that one. I was just looking at the Q&A. Yeah, that's a great question, and we get that all the time. So the first thing I would say is I think the email is on here. I can't see. Yeah,
Yes, it's
additional
on the.
questions. So the New Jersey at tnc.org, if you email your land protection or conservation uh, property or whatever the situation is, and just email it to us. So and let us know what the situation is, and we'll get back to you with one of two things. One, it might be, hey, this is something that we'd love to pursue further and work with one of our partners on trying to protect, or hey, this is something that's really awesome, but we not something that we work on right now, but we will help connect you with the right people in that area that do that work. So that's, just feel free to reach out and we'll try to make a connection as best we can.
Some, I think we have time for one more here, and this sounds like it is for Rebecca. What recommendations are you proposing to strengthen incentives for landowners to dedicate their land to conservation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So two of our bills come to mind for me. One is what we're calling the Conservation Tax Incentive Act. Basically, what that bill would do would allow you to deduct what amounts to be your capital gains on your tax process if you decide to sell your land for conservation rather than development. Only one other state has something similar to this, and they have it for land around a particular waterway. So New Jersey could really be a leader on expanding the intent of that bill to drum up more just need and hopefully want to conserve land. And the good news about that bill is we actually sat down and we did the math. And transaction like these are so few in regards to the state budget that it represents less than 1% of the state's entire total revenue to make this a reality. So this is just another way of showing that we can provide these tax incentives without impacting the state's financial situation. Another bill that comes to mind, again, something small but really does add up, is right now when you use a land trust like TNC to conserve your land, you have to pay a realty transfer fee. And so basically, the bill would just say, hey, you don't have to do that anymore if you're selling your land for conservation to a land trust. And you might say it's like crazy that we have to pass a whole law to do that. And I would agree with you, but we have to do it anyway.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. It looks like this is all we have time for today for the Q&A. If we could just go to the next slide, please, Elliot, that would be great. Perfect. Thank you so much. So before we wrap things up, I just wanted to quickly highlight the final webinar from our Earth Month webinar series. If you can please join us on April 30th, we'll be diving into the state of New Jersey's coastal marsh habitats and our efforts to protect them. We have the details listed here on the screen, but I will also be including a link for the webinar registration form in that follow-up email that I keep mentioning. So be sure to keep an eye out for that email. Again, thank you, Elliot and Rebecca, for that awesome presentation, and thank you everyone for tuning in to learn more about our land conservation efforts in New Jersey. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.